Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining today's call. I'm Stephanie Lawley with the House Committee on Education and Labor. We are recording this call, but members of the media are also welcome to record on their end. We want to get to as many questions as possible from the press. At the conclusion of the speaking program, we will take questions in the order in which they are received. If you're asking a question, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen to enter the queue, or press *9 if you've dialed in by phone. And now I'll turn over to Representative Levin.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thanks for all the members of the press who are joining us. We're hoping that Adriano Espaillat might overcome some technical difficulties and join us too. For now, I'm here with Representative Mondaire Jones. We're going to speak very briefly and really focus on your questions. I have to tell you all something. It was a huge day when the 2 days it took us when the Education and Labor Committee marked up our part of the Build Back Better Act. Our part includes $761 billion of investments to lower costs for families, secure good paying jobs for American workers, and set a strong foundation for our kids. Overall, it includes lowering the cost of childcare and securing universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. These are huge investments that data have shown pay back big time for the economy, not to mention for the parents and kids involved. I know Representative Jones will talk about childcare. He has been one of our absolute champions on that. Lowering the cost of higher education. My America's College Promise Act is largely in here to fund 2 years of tuition and fee-free community college. Lower the cost of 2 years of schooling at historically Black colleges and universities and other minority serving institutions, and increase the value of Pell Grants. Just huge to prepare folks. And then strengthening our public schools by investing big time in repairing, modernizing, and rebuilding crumbling and outdated school buildings, helping folks secure good paying jobs by expanding job training, and helping prevent child hunger by expanding the child nutrition programs that have been the most effective, some of which we've seen become more effective during this pandemic. You know, working people have gotten the short end of the stick in this country for like 40 years since the Reagan era, and income and wealth inequality has just grown beyond all bounds. This Build Back Better Act is President Joe Biden's vision of how to fix that. And it includes even things like civil penalties for employers who violate workers' rights, which will raise revenue for the Treasury, totally appropriate for the reconciliation process, but also will contribute to a more equal society by letting workers be more free to form unions and bargain collectively. So this is really an amazing package. I'm so proud to be on the Ed and Labor Committee and to play a small part in pushing it forward. And one of the people who did amazing work to get it across the finish line was my colleague from New York, Mondaire Jones. Mondaire, I'm passing it over to you.
Thanks so much. Representative Levin is being far too modest when he describes his role as small. I mean, he has been one of the folks doing the lion's share of the work to pass these big programs through committee, and it's just an honor to be in partnership with him. Good afternoon, everyone. I am excited to be with you all today to talk about the very successful week, as you just heard, we had last week in the Education and Labor Committee. After hours of debate, marking up our portion of the reconciliation package, also known as the Build Back Better Act, I am thrilled that my colleagues and I prevailed in our fight to include several historic investments in childcare, education, and good paying jobs. One of the key provisions we passed out of committee is a truly universal childcare program, which the committee adopted in the form of an amendment I authored with Representative Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey. Our amendment tracks the provisions in a bill that I introduced with Senator Elizabeth Warren in April. the Universal Child Care and Early Learning Act. Specifically, that bill would make childcare universal by guaranteeing that no family in America has to spend more than 7% of its household income on childcare. Now we've got to ensure that provision remains in the Build Back Better Act when we vote on it on the House floor. Universal childcare will be transformative, not only for the thousands of families in my district, which is a very expensive place in which to live, who either can't afford or struggle to afford childcare. But for millions of Americans throughout our country, this is going to be transformative. The issue of childcare is personal for me. Growing up, my mom got help raising me from my grandparents. And my grandmother cleaned homes for a living, and when daycare was too expensive, she took me to work with her. To this day, I am grateful that my grandmother was able to help care for me, but I have no idea what my mother would have done had she not been able to rely on my grandmother. And of course, in the richest nation in the world, no child should have to accompany a guardian to work because childcare is too expensive. Childcare is infrastructure. It is why I have worked so hard, along with my colleagues like Representative Levin and Representative Espaillat and Representative Mikey Sherrill, to ensure that no child has to go to work with their guardian moving forward. Along with childcare, as you just heard, we made critical investments in higher education last week. After fighting to secure $111 billion in the Build Back Better Act, we are lowering the cost of higher education by providing 2 years, as you just heard, of tuition-free community college. This will ensure that almost any working class student who wants to attend college, community college, can now do so without having to worry about the high cost that all too often comes with receiving an education. As we continue to fight to cancel student debt, which the president can do with the stroke of a pen under the Higher Education Act, which would create an affordable pathway to higher education, this is a critical step forward in the direction of making college affordable for millions of Americans. In an economy where a college education is increasingly required to get a good paying job. That is exactly what we did by including tuition-free community college in this reconciliation package. And as a member of the Ed and Labor Committee, I'm committed to building a country that guarantees all of these things: universal childcare, affordable higher education, and good paying jobs. And I will not stop fighting until we do that. Thank you so much.
Okay, we are going to conclude the speaking program now. And if Rep. Espaillat ends up joining us, we'll turn to him. If you have a question, click the raise hand button in the center bottom of your screen, or by pressing *9 if you dialed in by phone. We will take as many questions as we can. If you're asking a question, please let us know which member your question is directed to and your outlet so we can get to as many questions as possible. We have our first question from David from the American Prospect. David, you're invited to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks for doing this call. Obviously, what was passed in both Ed Labor markup and the other markups in the House is dependent on a $3.5 trillion outlay. Obviously, Senator Manchin has talked about scaling that back significantly. When this whole process was set up, there was this two-track strategy that the Senate would have to pass both a reconciliation bill and a bipartisan infrastructure bill that would be agreed to by a majority of the House before going forward. And I know Representative Jones has been pretty outspoken about this, that he would not agree to pass the infrastructure bill, which is slated for a September 27th vote, without reconciliation duly passed by the Senate. Representative Levin, are you in agreement with that strategy, that if the Senate significantly drops the level of spending in this bill, would you go forward with the infrastructure bill without having a reconciliation bill that is acceptable to a majority of the House?
Well, thanks for your question, David. I am absolutely firm that we are yoking these two bills together. the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which is fine. We need to work on roads and bridges and sewers, and there's a little broadband, there's a little tiny bit. I introduced the EV Freedom Act with AOC, and that's one of my biggest priorities. There's a little bit of money over there for, EV charging infrastructure, but it's totally inadequate in many ways. It's completely inadequate on climate change. It's not the ed and labor portion, so Mondaire and I didn't talk about it, but this Build Back Better Act will be the biggest climate change legislation passed by the Congress ever by a mile. And then all of this human infrastructure, this legislation to help people be able to breathe and live in this country without every week worrying that they're living paycheck to paycheck. How are they going to make ends meet? So it's very important that we do these things together. David, I don't want to get into like minutia of process. I feel like I've learned about that exactly how it works, but I can tell you that I am completely committed to there being a Build Back Better Act together with the bipartisan infrastructure framework, and that we have to pass both of them, and we're not gonna, yield on that.
Can I have a quick follow-up on that? So if the bill is significantly shrunk from the 3.5 trillion, would you prefer as a strategy to cut back these elements of the bill, or to just make sure you're using take 2 or 3 out and jettison the rest and make sure you're doing them right? In other words, is it more important to do a series of half measures, or make sure you're doing full measures in what you have able with the resources available?
Well, I want to also invite Rep. Jones to respond to this, but my own view, David, is, first of all, we're fighting for this. We're fighting for this. I think what you saw in the Ed and Labor Committee last week and some of the other committees really is part of this process that we are standing and fighting. And remember, a lot of us are members of the Progressive Caucus here. This isn't the Progressive Caucus plan. This is the Joe Biden plan, right? This $3.5 trillion. We were talking about $6 trillion. So we're going to stand and fight for this. As to your more detailed question, what I think is that it's very important to stand up policies that are actually transformative for American workers, individuals, families, kids. And, because look, the idea that you have to have them be 7 years or 8 years, the truth of the matter is that the Congress that's elected in November of, say, 2026 will decide what happens in 2027 and 2028.
Right.
And the way we affect them and control them is by creating programs that the working moms of this country say, wait a minute, 856,000 of us all left the workforce in 1 month from August to September of 2020 because there was no childcare back in place. There were no schools, and we had to take care of our kids and our elders. Now we've got universal childcare. Nobody who wants my vote is going to take that away. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to, we don't want half measures. We want stuff that is effective and works and serves the American people. Let me turn to Mondaire, and then Representative Espaillat has joined us, and he may want to say hello, or, Stephanie, however you want to handle it.
I agree with Andy. My personal view is that, well, first of all, let me just clarify something, because earlier, David, you said, do you want to pass the infrastructure bill or the reconciliation bill? They are both infrastructure bills. This is collectively an infrastructure package, and we must pass the Build Back Better Act in recognition of the fact that things like climate action, which climate disasters just devastated my district and many districts across the country, is part and parcel of our infrastructure moving forward. So, on a personal note, I tend to agree with Andy. I think that, it's better that we do programs well than do half measures that turn out not to materially improve the lives of enough people. And as a result, do not galvanize the kind of broad support that universal programs like Social Security and Medicare, which have stood the test of time, thank God, have in our public consciousness right now.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Representative Espaillat if you'd like to make any remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to my colleagues for their efforts to approve this piece of legislation that will invest $761 billion for families, children, families, education. I think a great investment, probably unprecedented in government, and to have as much daycare as possible for everybody, to have a free community colleges, to have funding for bilingual and dual language teachers, certified teachers, of which there is a lack of funding for training, and therefore a lack of certified teachers. Often we have to go abroad to hire these teachers. And so this is so important. The Climate Corp, New York City went through, we got in one day as much rain as we get in a month. But that's just 3.1 inches of rain, 9 inches of rain, over 9 inches of rain through the entire Ida tropical storm. And the infrastructure really cannot handle it. So to complement the investment that we're making in transportation infrastructure, we also must have the Climate Corps for communities to be invested in the changes that need to happen to ensure that the kind of floodings that occurred last week in New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut and New York State don't happen, don't have the kind of devastating impact again in the future. As I said earlier, community colleges, so important, because community colleges are not only educating folks, they're going to be able to train people for the often prevailing wage jobs that the transportation infrastructure investment will provide. So this is a great investment in children, women, families, education, and I think it's something that has not happened before, something that America really needed for a long time, and happy to be associated with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Mark. Mark, I invite you to unmute your line.
Can you hear me? Okay.
There is a bit of an echo.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that you submitted a question to the chat that I can read out if you're having some audio issues.
Yes, go ahead.
You asked the members to speak more about the FLSA and PRO Act provisions and how you'll get those past the House moderates. I believe he's referring to the civil monetary penalties. Representative Levin.
Yes, so we passed penalties that will raise some revenues for a range of when companies are breaking the law. This refers to workers' safety and health, to wage theft, and to when workers are trying to organize or bargain collectively. And we have marked this up. It was noticed. The Labor Committee has the kind of range of House members on it within the Democratic caucus, as does the broader caucus. And I feel like people, these are sensible provisions that will, prevail in the caucus. So I don't, I certainly do not expect or want to see them eliminated or watered down. They raise a little bit of revenue, but really they will be very helpful for reducing inequality in this country by reducing violation of workers' rights. And so they're very important, and we're going to fight to keep them in there. And I think they'll stay in there.
Great, and we have another pre-submitted question. And this is for a question for all of the members. There are a lot of proposals in this package. Could each member describe one or two of their top priorities? And I'll start with Representative Levin.
Yes, well, in addition to the labor provisions we were just talking about, among my very top priorities in our ed and labor part is the free community college and substantial support for students studying at HBCUs and other minority serving institutions, and the increase in Pell Grants. This is huge for increasing the number of young people and workers who who are unemployed, in getting the training, the skills, the credentials, the degrees they need to be competitive and to get a great new economic opportunity. We have polling that shows 70% of people who become unemployed during the pandemic are looking to change careers. And this is America. One of the whole key ideas is, if Adriano Espaillat wants to change careers, he can do it. And in Michigan, during the Great Recession, I can't tell you the number of manufacturing workers who became nurses, who became X-ray techs or other positions at hospitals, who stayed in manufacturing but got specific credentials in advanced manufacturing like nanotechnology and robotics. So we really have to open up education to everyone, make it free, make it affordable. It's not just good for that individual. It's good for the community, and it's good for the productivity of our country. So that's one of my big priorities, Stephanie.
Great. Representative Espaillat?
Sure. I think also community colleges is an important one for me, because the training that would happen there also for transportation infrastructure jobs is high skilled, digital training. We no longer can build the same way. We got to build back better and greener. And for that, it will entail the training of our workforce. Right now, we probably don't have all the trained labor force needed for that to occur. So I think that this will provide opportunities for communities like the ones that I represent, who have been chronically unemployed, and we must shift the paradigm and provide the job opportunities for them, making decent wages that will lift them to the middle class. That's one end. And then the daycare piece, the women won't be able to go back to work unless they have daycare. And I'm glad to see that there's an emphasis on family-based daycare, because many parents are opting for smaller setting, culturally sensitive and linguistic sensitive settings, with people that take care of their children, 3 or 4 kids at a time in their homes or in their apartments. So this will provide opportunities for parents to have more flexibility in their schedule and be able to then go back to work and then have the training that they need to have to ensure that they get good paying jobs. So this is really important. I also like the piece about the Hispanic Serving Institution and historical Black colleges, which have been chronically, and I say premeditatedly, left off the table many times and not given the kind of funding that they deserve.
Great. And the last question, Representative Jones, can you name, there are a lot of major priorities in this pack or proposals in this package. Can you describe your one or two top priorities in this package?
I'll give you 3. I mentioned climate action, which is required in an unprecedented way and on a large scale to respond to that existential threat known as climate change. Medicare expansion to include dental, vision, and hearing. And of course, that's preferred by 90% of the American people. So it has large bipartisan support. And universal child care, consistent with many of the provisions in the universal child care bill that I introduced back in April with Senator Warren.
Great. We do not have any other press questions. So now I invite Representative Levin to provide any closing remarks.
Well, I just want to thank Rep. Espaillat, who's on the move, and Rep. Jones for joining me here. They are two of the, great champions. It's just been an honor to work with them. I just want to reiterate that in my time in Congress, the markup of the Build Back Better Act and the Education and Labor Committee was a real highlight. We are really committed, the three of us and way beyond, to keeping these great proposals in the final bill so that we can lift up our youngest kids from infancy through preschool, fixing their buildings in K-12, helping everybody get a great college education, and helping parents work and be able to have a good living by having childcare, by having the training they need. This is really, as Mondaire Jones said, when I don't know if Representative Espaillat was on, this is infrastructure. This is infrastructure means what society needs to function well. And yeah, you need a road to drive on or a subway to ride in. But the really highest calling I feel that we have is providing our people the tools they need to live a dignified life. And this is really at the core of what we've done. So thanks for your interest, members of the press. And, we look forward to being responsive to you and as we go forward.